Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, welcome. My name is Zdenek Hanzalek, and you are watching the 44th talk of the scheduling seminar. Today, I'm happy to introduce Vikram Tiwari. He is Associate Professor of Anesthesiology at School of Medicine at Vanderbilt University. And he is also with Owen Graduate School of Management and also leads small business analytics team at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Vikram made his MBA originally in Birla in India in 1995, and then another MBA at Illinois Institute of Technology in 2002. Finally, he got his PhD at Kelley School of Business, Indiana University in 2008. By the way, he likes sports and he's a big fan of cricket, as people of India usually like. Vikram, it's great to have you here, and please go ahead. We are looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Zdenek, and thank you also to Mike Pinedo. I know he's on his way back from Hong Kong, so he couldn't be here. So thank you both of you and the entire team for inviting me. It's exciting. I see Mehmet is here. I know a couple of people already. So good to be amongst friends. And today I'll talk about surgery scheduling. I know we've had some talks on healthcare scheduling. So when I got the invite, I thought about how to make it interesting and different from some of the other topics that have been covered. So I thought I'll talk about not only the research side, which obviously everybody can look at our papers and see that, but I also wanted to give more of a practice-oriented side of scheduling and hopefully come up with some newer maybe avenues of research that may have not yet been touched upon in the academic world. So as Zdenek had introduced, my primary appointment is in the School of Medicine, and I also have a hospital appointment. So that gives me a front row seat to the challenges of capacity management, the realities of scheduling and the complexities of scheduling of surgeries and operating rooms. So my hope is to basically bring all of that in our discussion in the next 40-45 minutes or so. So where is Nashville? I know we have an international audience, so I thought let's begin by seeing where Nashville is, and let's see if somebody can identify that. Here is the map of United States. Nashville is right here in the southeast of the country, in the state of Tennessee. Tennessee is a landlocked country, landlocked state. Right here are the Appalachian and the Blue Ridge Mountain Range. So that's the eastern side, and then it extends all the way here to the west. Memphis and Nashville is right here in the middle, in the central time zone. It's a country music capital of the country. If you're country music fans, this is the place people would end up coming and visiting. So in Nashville, we are the largest academic medical center. In fact, probably the largest in the southeast area of the country. So we won't go through all the facts here, but many different hospitals. And I primarily reside in the Vanderbilt University Hospital, which is the adults hospital. And in that hospital, we have 4 on-campus surgical sites. So not 4 ORs, but 4 sites for a total of 58 ORs. We also have 2 ambulatory sites, which we call ambulatory surgery centers. And I'll explain that further as we go down, where there are 11 ORs. So basically, we are kind of, I'm not responsible, but the analytics part of the ORs is my responsibility. Because I reside in the perioperative services department from a hospital side. I do get involved in capacity management kind of projects in the hospital as well, but 80-90% of my focus in capacity management is in the OR capacity management of these 69 ORs, and we are soon building another 12 ORs, which will be again on campus. So we are expanding. So of the 88,000 surgical cases, currently amongst these 69 ORs, we're doing about 55,000 surgical cases per year. And it's a big group, as you can see, level 1 trauma center, academic medical center. So the objective of my talk, I thought this is obviously an international audience, and I do not know how many have purely healthcare research interests versus scheduling research, interest in other areas. So I thought I'll start by thinking that we should probably talk about what is OR capacity management, and familiarize people with that. And then I can talk about one or two of my recently published papers alongside my co-authors, and then some unexplored areas, I think, which are unexplored and interesting that I'm looking at these days, and I'm sure the group might find them interesting as well. So what is an operating room? Hopefully none of us have had to visit an operating room, but maybe some of us have. However, if you have visited, you were likely unconscious under anesthesia and so may not have seen this. So here's how a typical operating room looks like. Obviously, the patient is right here on the operating room table. The surgeon is usually standing right next to the patient, unless it's a robotic surgery, in which case the surgeon would be sitting somewhere on a console in a corner, and there would be robotic arms, which the surgeon is controlling sitting on the console. So it's not the robot doing the surgery, it's the surgeon still doing the surgery, but sitting at a far off distance, in the room, but at a distance. So a patient, a surgeon, and then comes the anesthesia. Usually an anesthesiologist, a physician, would start off the case and then walk off. Usually an anesthesiologist is supervising up to 3 or 4 ORs at the same time. And usually in US, a CRNA, which is called a certified registered nurse anesthetist, stays back in the OR and looks after the patient. The anesthesiologist is just supervising and roaming between the rooms. Then on the nursing side, here is the most important person, the scrub tech. The scrub tech and the surgeon, the scrub tech knows exactly what the surgeon needs, and therefore this is called the back-end table, where all the instruments that would be needed for and the supplies that would be needed by the surgeon have been prepared and laid out. And so scrub tech knows exactly where the procedure is going on and what instrument the surgeon would require next, and he or she would keep handing those instruments back and forth. Now, this is what would be called the sterile field, just around the table. That means once they are inside here, they will not step out, because the moment they step out, they would be considered unsterile, and they will have to basically, they can't go back. So who stays outside the sterile field is this person called the circulator, the nurse. And the name circulator implies that he or she is able to go out of the room and come back if needed. And she's the one, or he's the one, doing all the charting and keeping a track of what supplies are getting used, what's not getting used, the counts of the sponges being used. So this is an important person. Now, apart from all of these, usually you would also have in academic medical centers, you would have trainees that would be next to the surgeon, because they are getting trained, like a surgery resident, a fellow surgeon. And in addition, they may require specialized equipment in the OR, for which you may need a first assist, which is usually a surgeon. If a radiology equipment is needed, then a RAT tech, we call a radiology technologist, is also needed at the time that the instrument is needed on the surgery. So the point I wanted to make from this slide is, if we think about OR scheduling or surgery scheduling, we are really scheduling all of these things, not just people, but also equipment and supplies and instruments are all needed at the right place at the right time to have a successful, safe surgery happen. And usually in organizations, these decisions of scheduling of these different entities, these different equipments, people, are being done separately. Anesthesia is a separate department. CRNAs are a separate scheduling. Nursing is separate scheduling. Surgeon is scheduling usually how many cases they would do, when they would do it, and obviously instrument and supplies, and again the RAT techs and everything else. So think of it as a complicated, actually it's a very complicated process of getting everything ready, but obviously the things get done every day, thousands and thousands of times around the world. And usually the outcomes are good for the patient. So complicated process, but that's what it takes to get the surgery done. So the other important thing I wanted to bring from a scheduling perspective is that we think of ORs, we shouldn't think of ORs as just being homogeneous. They are many factors determine what type of surgery will get done in which kind of ORs. So for example, one major distinction that people should be aware of as they work on scheduling is which kind of a surgery center they are trying to schedule surgeries for. Is it an ambulatory surgery center, which we call ASCs, where primarily outpatient surgeries are done? That means the patient comes from home on the day of surgery, gets prepared in the holding room, goes to the OR, and then goes to the recovery room called the PACU, post anesthesia care unit. And after recovery, couple of hours, they go home. So this is as a single flow, everybody follows the same flow. Usually these surgeries are smaller in duration, they are lesser acute, faster recovery times, shorter OR block time. That means the block for the day, and I'll talk about that in a minute, is usually just 8 or 10 hours. And there are faster turnaround time between cases because there isn't much that has been spilled, the blood hasn't been spilled as much, there hasn't been too many equipment used, too many instruments used. So the turnaround times can be faster, 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes turnaround times. And these centers can be just single specialty, like you must have seen, just orthopedic ASCs, or they could be multi-specialty where a group of these surgeries might be getting done at the same time. Now, as opposed to ambulatory surgery, so you can already see this is more of an easier scheduling process here versus a non-ambulatory setting, which typically you would have heard people talk about main ORs, right? The on-campus main ORs. And exactly the opposite here happens. They are oriented more towards inpatient surgeries, but can also do outpatient procedures. And the flow gets more complicated, right? So in addition to the basic flow that we just saw, right after the OR, the patient might actually go to an ICU, then obviously to a step-down unit, and then home, or could go to a PACU. And the patients could already be an inpatient. They may not be coming from home. They may already be on a unit in the hospital because they got admitted a couple of days ago and now require a surgery. So that flow again changes. And again, this outward flow can go into multiple steps. And obviously, here's the interesting angle, which is an ED patient, an emergency department patient comes in, and they go directly into the OR. They usually bypass even the holding and preparation steps because that's an emergency, and the OR needs to be made available. And that's the research that I'll talk about in the next 5-10 minutes that we recently did and published in POMS. So as opposed to ambulatory, these ORs are much more specialized. There is not complete flexibility with respect to which type of surgeries can be done in which type of rooms. For example, cardiac surgery can only be done in the cardiac surgery rooms because of the requirement for bypass equipment and other kind of equipment when the open heart kind of cases are being done. Pulmonary, which is basically the lungs, cases require negative pressure rooms so that they can maintain the whatever they need to do around the lungs. Vascular surgery needs hybrid equipment, very complicated, like $15 million equipments are needed for microvascular surgeries and all of that stuff. So the point I want to make from here is when we think about OR scheduling, we can think of an entire OR suite, usually, at least in the complex environment that at least I work in, and think of as if we can schedule all the 39 ORs through some algorithm. Depending upon the nature of the rooms, the nature of the cases, we may have to just look at that subset of ORs and think about, can we improve the scheduling for those rooms? And hence my disclaimer that my talk here or my experience usually is more from a large level 1 trauma academic medical centers. These are usually, not usually, all of them are not-for-profit centers, which just implies that not that they're not trying to make a profit, it just means that the profits get reinvested inside and they don't have to pay taxes. But there are similarities in scheduling strategies amongst these level 1 trauma centers with even for-profit hospitals or community hospitals, government hospitals like the VA system. So there are similarities, but often there becomes differences as well, including in who controls the scheduling process, and is the hospital have more say in how the schedule should be built versus how the surgeons or do surgeons have more control. So that kind of a behavioral aspect, and I'll talk about this towards the end, causes a lot of dynamic, basically it builds dynamism in how scheduling actually finally works. And of course, scheduling differs amongst countries. European and Canadian models are obviously much different than Europe. Payment models are different. The capacity management can be different also. So, okay, how do surgeries actually then get scheduled? So think about elective surgery and emergency surgery, which is basically the topic for the talk I'll give, for the paper that I'll cover. So elective surgery schedule is primary care physician would refer a patient to a clinic, to a surgical clinic, or a patient would search for surgeons of repute because they need a surgery, and then schedules an appointment, visits the surgeon, and if the surgeon determines that a surgery is needed, they book a surgical appointment, or a surgical case is booked for a future date on which that particular surgeon will be in the OR and has unfilled capacity in his or her block. And I'll talk about block in a second. And the time and day time also works for the patient. So you can see this is much more planned, including taking the consideration of when it works for the patient and the surgeon together. So this is booked in advance. And emergency, as we just discussed, patients come directly from the ER, ED, unplanned, random arrival, and of any kind of acuity could be coming. So in the previous slide, I basically started referring to two concepts that I wanted to cover. One is how does that the schedule for the surgery schedule for a future day builds up slowly and is likely going to be fixed. That is, the surgeon doesn't usually move the case to a different day, right? So this is an important idea to know that often in our scheduling practice, we assume that all the cases are available and now they can be placed anywhere. And I will show my research in which we also had to do that. However, in reality, it's what's called an online bin packing problem. And so I'll talk about that. But here's a real example of how the schedule, or how this one by one the surgeries actually come and the schedule builds up. So this is one of our reports that we have where we are able to see for the next 30 days how many cases are on schedule starting 30 days out. So for June 1st, 30 days before June 1st, so think of this as maybe May 1st, we had 23 cases booked on the schedule. And then each day forward, you can see more and more cases keep coming up. And then as we get closer, you can see the actual that we had versus what we had one day out are pretty close. And we keep a track of this. So you can see July 3rd, we had 17 cases as of June 5th. So this schedule will build up. Now, because of this, as you can see, it's at least in our case, you can see a couple of cases each day come on board. And so early on, about 8, 9, 10 years ago, when we started looking at this issue, we realized that there is some signal that we can extract in this way that the schedule builds. And we are able to predict 30 days out. We built regression-based models to be able to predict what our future volume would be even 30 days out. So it's essentially, I'm actually looking at this number 23 and making a prediction of how many cases would actually get done. And so that it has been very powerful. We still use that. I've expanded it to inpatient locations, outpatient locations, to our children's hospital. And that's going really well, and that got really good publication in the anesthesiology journal. And recently, a couple of years ago with my postdoc, Junyup, we expanded it even further where we can predict not at the aggregate level, because this is the aggregate overall services. We are able to predict at the surgeon level how many cases a specific surgeon would be doing. We used a different methodology, not because we can predict up to 42 days in advance. And you can see even 30 days out, we don't have enough volume. So 42 days out, this number would be even lower. So we use a different method, but we are able to exploit this way of online one by one schedule build. And that has been addressed also by other people. Recently, Bandi and Gupta, the MSOM paper, operating room staffing and scheduling, look at a community hospital and describe this as the online bin packing problem, where jobs are coming or packages are coming one at a time. Their study though is based on community hospital with some restrictions that don't exist in academic, or some flexibility that doesn't exist in academic medical centers. For example, they have control over blocks. Surgeons operate in any OR that the block gets assigned to. Schedules developed 2 to 3 days in advance. Cases that don't fit the schedule time are deferred to future days. So a little more flexibility and control over schedule building, but that's not how I think typically most organizations would be able to work. The other thing here is going back to that theme of being able to differentiate what kind of location we are trying to schedule. We have to understand the characteristics of that. So here's an example of how the schedule building is really important to understand. Here are about, I think, 240 surgeons that I tried to group or create clusters based on how far in advance, what percentage of their cases get booked. So let's look at this last one first. 68 surgeons fell in this cluster. And why is this a unique cluster as opposed to these? Is 60% of the cases of these 68 surgeons were already booked 29 plus days in advance. And as you get closer to the day of surgery, you can see they don't have too many cases that they are booking. And therefore, these could be called the exclusively elective surgeons. So the ORs in which these surgeons are operating will be very different from the ORs in which these 65 surgeons are operating. This I call the exclusively add-on cluster, because 60% of the cases here of these surgeons are booked on the day of T-0 or a day before. So this would be all of your stroke cases, your orthopedic trauma cases, broken bones, transplant surgeries. So those kind of cases, those kind of surgeons. And so the scheduling there will be very different. And then here comes the biggest group, actually, 108 surgeons. And this is what makes it really interesting, that 50% of their cases are booked 15 days or further in advance. You can see this is 49%. But they also have cases that are coming closer to the day off. So within 14 days, they have the rest of the 50% of the cases coming. And this creates a lot of challenges from a capacity management. These are easier to manage because if they haven't booked, we can release the rooms. This is easier to manage because we don't really have to we have to keep these rooms available for these surgeons. However, this creates the problem because if they haven't booked at 14 days, if half of the room is empty, what does that imply? Will it get used? Will it not get used? There is a chance that it will get used, but also it might not get used. And that's where a lot of the effort on the closer to the day off starts getting focused on. How many rooms can be released? Are there wait lists that we can use, put cases from? And so that is, we can think of it as a scheduling challenge, but also a very operational capacity management challenge. So the other thing I mentioned was the block time. So I think most of you may have heard about that. Here is how typically blocks work. This is the block scheduling, a small example where each room, each day of the week has been assigned to a service line. So room 1 is neurointerventional, room 2 is urology surgery, all days of the week. Room 3 though gets interesting. It has 4 different service lines: neurosurgery on Monday, Tuesday, general oncology surgery Wednesday, thoracic on Thursday, and then urology on Friday. So again, in our typical scheduling models, usually we do not get into this level of complexity at the service level. Now, to make it even more interesting, what in reality what happens is that neurosurgery department may then assign this block to a specific surgeon. So the hospital is assigning the capacity to the service line, and then the service line is deciding amongst the, let's say, 10 surgeons I have, which surgeon operates on which block that they have on which day of the week. And so that creates the next level of scheduling challenge that they are internally managing, as opposed to the hospital. Hospital is deciding in consultation with the service lines how many blocks are needed, how long should the blocks be. So this time, the 7:30 to 5:30 is a 10-hour block. You can see some of the other blocks maybe even longer. This is only an 8-hour block, and so on and so forth. So from a capacity management side, issues of which service should get which day of the week, how should they be alternating among services, how long the staffing should be planned for, which is the block time, and so on and so forth. Those are the capacity management challenges. And to make it interesting, here's another ASC example where now the blocks are actually assigned to surgeons. I've hidden the names here, but the surgeons can vary by the week of the month. So week 1 and 3 is one surgeon only for about till noon, and then weeks 2 and 4 is some other surgeon, and then so on and so forth. So now the capacity is getting way more segmented, and some days it's assigned to just a service line as opposed to a surgeon. So really complicated and difficult to manage. So I've mentioned this, but Hop Lovejoy has a great book. Chapter 4 talks about OR capacity management. And then there are, just from OR capacity management, you can see strategic, tactical, and operational decision making. I've mentioned some of that. I don't know if we'll get time for this paper, but if anybody is interested, I can send the slides out. This talks about strategic as well as some operational scheduling combined into deciding how much capacities we can have at an ASC. And also, before we jump into the next topic, really good papers out there recently. Obviously, this one's from our friend Mike Pinedo. This is the Demulativer Group Journal of Scheduling. Really nice paper that summarizes some of this. Okay, so here's what finally happens, right? We were talking about the schedule. All of that was the schedule, and then here is how the final, on the day of the final outcome might look like. So here's an example. This is an ambulatory surgery center with 4 ORs. OR 1 and 2 are assigned to, you can see all are assigned to the orthopedic block. These 2 rooms are a little longer. Looks like they're starting a little late, 8:30, going to 5:30. And rooms 1 and 2 are assigned to one surgeon, and rooms 3 and 4 are assigned to this other surgeon. So you can see this surgeon is likely doing small cases, not too long, short cases, and this surgeon has a little longer duration cases. But look at this interesting thing that's happening. You can see there is some overlap. So here is the case that went from here to here, but this case started prior to this case ended. And I'll try and get to this as one of the themes I want to show why this, I think, is an interesting scheduling problem, and the new angles that this creates amongst what we call the flip rooms. And to make things more interesting, here's a schedule. This is not actual, this is the schedule. This is actually scheduled at T-1. So this is an evening before the day of surgery in the main ORs. And you can see, as expected, really long case. Here's a case that is scheduled from 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock. really long. And why is that? Because it's exploration laparoscopy, which essentially means they do not know, the surgeon don't really know what all is wrong or the extent of the problem in that patient. And so they will actually open up the person, or actually it's laparoscopy, so they might not open up, but go through laparoscopically and then explore what all needs to be done. And it's very possible that they decide that, let's say if it's a cancer patient, pancreatic cancer, that it is so far advanced that what they were thinking is not possible, and they really just close the case. And the case may just end at 10 o'clock. And so that brings you these challenges for the main ORs. And then basically the rest of the capacity goes unused. The nursing that are scheduled are basically idle for that day. And then there are other robotic rooms here that I've showed you. But here's the interesting thing. These rooms, ST1 to 4, are virtual rooms. Like, these are not physical rooms. And you can see there are about 11 cases or so that are already sitting in the schedule or are waiting to be scheduled, because these are all what's called add-on cases. And they are likely that they can wait for about 12 hours or so, because if this was an evening snapshot, these will get done likely not overnight, but probably next day morning, or could even get overnight if it's required. So cerebral angiogram, for example, is likely somebody needs to have might be having some hemorrhage in the brain. Look at this one. This is just surgeon generic harvesting of multiple organs. So looks like this is somebody has died and the organs have to be taken out. So the on-call transplant surgeon will likely do that. These all look like orthopedic trauma cases, for which we actually, because orthopedic trauma is such that every day we will have, there are rooms that are just set aside for orthopedic trauma, which would be called dedicated emergency ORs, for which we don't really schedule, but as cases come, they get placed there. So that brings us, that's a good segue to this quick problem that I'm going to talk about, which is exactly this. When there are rooms which are for elective surgeries, but if emergency surgeries come in that have to be done in that room, how do we can we come up with some nice scheduling mechanisms so that the emergency patients can be done in about the right amount of time? And then what happens to, how do we reschedule the elective schedule, because now we had an interruption where an emergency case had to be fit. So I think what I'll do is I'll go through this really quickly, just highlighting the main high points here. And so our group here, and really this was Kyung and Chilaya and Mike and myself, I provided the context and the data, and we discussed solutions. But Kyung, who was a PhD student at that time, took this upon himself, and that was the end result. So very nice study. We do three phases. In the first phase, there is a weekly aggregate schedule that gets created using the LPT technique heuristic. And then in phase 2, we've come up with a new heuristic for assigning the surgeries to ORs. And then in the phase 3, we have random arrival of emergency surgeries, and they need to be fit in within a certain amount of time. And we call it, we took the emergency surgery as those that can wait up to a 2-hour window before they must get operated. So we need to create schedules so that the emergency surgery can always fit in within 2 hours. And then the rest of the schedule that gets disturbed for the day has to be rescheduled, for which we again have another heuristic. It's an NP hard problem, so heuristics is the way to go. And we basically consider 3 neurosurgery ORs out of the 39, 3 neurosurgery ORs, which do both elective and emergency surgeries. And I'm going to just go to the more interesting part here. This being a very data-driven problem, we were able to identify patterns in which the schedule actually works. So, for example, the slides I was showing earlier, we studied exactly how those 3 rooms typically get work. What's the daily pattern? And because the Combinations are too many. Surgeries can be from anywhere from 45 minutes to as many to 6 hours, 8 hours. Craniotomy cases, we had to find ways to group them into these buckets. So came up with this. Type C surgeries are less than 2 hours. Type B are between 2 and 6 hours, and type A are greater than 6 hours. And came up with these 17 possible combinations of how the day might look like for these 3 ORs. So in the phase 1, as I said, we are looking for the aggregate pattern. So we are basically building what we call, I'm going to just skip this. We get the aggregate schedule. So let's just look at the example. We follow the LPT rule to create that aggregate day by day. Let's look at this example, longest processing time rule, the 31 elective surgeries that have to be scheduled in this week. So the weekly plan is being created. The way we do that is we sort them from the longest surgery to the shortest surgery, and we start putting them one by one to minimize the total time for the day. So the first 7-hour surgery gets placed on day 1, and then the next longest surgery gets placed, then the next longest surgeries get placed, and then the one where we have the minimum make span, we start placing surgeries there one by one, and that then finally leads to creation of this aggregate schedule for the week, right? Remember, there are 3 ORs, so we are not doing it at the OR level, we are doing it at the day level to basically balance out the load amongst the days of the week, and we get the final schedule. So here is how the final schedule will look like for those 31 surgeries. And it's kind of it's balanced in a sense that there isn't a day that is going too far out, and there isn't a day that is ending too early. So that was phase 1. Then for phase 2, we started looking at mixed integer programming. Quickly found that obviously it's going to be a strong NP hard, especially when we have to schedule surgery so that there is no overlap for more than 2 hours. Because if there is an overlap for more than 2 hours, then the emergency surgery will have to wait more than 2 hours, and that was one hard constraint we had in our real data, that we do need to get those emergency urgent cases within 2 hours. So we develop a heuristic. So let's consider the day 1, where we have these 6 surgeries, and we have to place them now into the 3 ORs. So the way this works is it's called the LPT M-K SPT-K rule, where let's say if we have M ORs, K of those ORs are scheduled based on SPT, and the rest of them are scheduled based on the LPT rule. Since in our case, we have 3 ORs, we make one OR be scheduled based on the shortest processing time, and the other 2 ORs scheduled based on the longest processing time. So the way it works is we will, and show you through an example, but basically we arrange them according to LPT, and then we place the shortest surgery in the first OR, in the OR number 1, which we call the SPT OR. Then we look for where is the next available OR. If it happens to be the SPT OR, we place the case there. If it is not, then we pick the case with the longest processing time and put it in that OR. So let's see an example here. So we've got 6 surgeries that need to be placed. We've sorted them, arranged them from longest processing to shortest processing time. We have 3 ORs, SPT OR 1 and 2. 1 is the SPT OR, 2 and 3 will be the LPT OR. So we look for the shortest case, 1.5, that gets placed here. The next available OR is OR 2, which is the LPT OR. So we pick up the 7.5, place it there. The next one is this. So again, LPT. Now the next available OR becomes OR 1. So we go down at the stream here, place that. This is still the next one. This one goes there. Now next available is here. So we place that there. So that's the rule for creating the daily schedule at the OR level. And why this works is, and here's an explanation, I won't read all of this, but what it allows us to do is, if we would have only used LPT, let's go back here, if we would have only used LPT, what could have happened is that all the 3 ORs in the beginning of the day may have long duration surgeries going on. And at that time, the overlap will be more than 2 hours. So if an emergency case comes in, there is no room for, because we can't stop a surgery. And so the case will, the emergency case will have to wait more than 2 hours. And therefore, with the SPT rule built in for 1 OR here, it gives us these break-in moments at least every 2 hours. There is a break-in moment happening, and that allows us to insert the emergency case. And here's the MIP solution, which is very similar. The only difference here that MIP gave was the 3 got placed here instead of 1.5 there and 3 there. So close and similar solution from MIP for the shorter duration problems. And then when the ED comes in, I'll just show you through this example here quickly. What happens is when the emergency case comes in, as I said earlier, there is an ability now to slide it in here after this 1.5 hour surgery. So what we first have to do is, we cannot disturb the surgeries that are already going on. So what needs to be rescheduled will be the ones that are left, that have still not begun. So that goes in here, and then we follow the same LPT SPT rule to reschedule these balance surgeries again in the same manner. And that's how the processing goes. Now, in addition to all of this, what we also did here was we also consider stochastic scheduling time. So I'm not going to talk about that, but because there is variability in how long the surgery can last, the probability of this getting pushed further out is still possible. So we've studied that, and this is a revised online rule where we basically virtually start calling this another OR which has the least amount of time as the SPT OR. So we kind of like revised online LPT rule is actually even better than the purely online rule which I had described more in detail. So different combinations, but this rule essentially works really well, and it's easy to explain to administrators. Is also intuitive, that you don't place all the long surgery cases at the same time together, right? So it kind of makes sense when we explain like that. Okay, I did go really fast because I knew this is all available out there, and you can interact with us, any of us, to do that. Here's what I wanted to also do quickly, because I think it's interesting. Okay, so two thoughts I want to leave us with about future research. So let's go back to that ambulatory surgery center example I was showing you, and how these 2 surgeons are scheduling cases. So here's what we call the flip room schedules, and it doesn't have to be ambulatory. This flip rooms scheduling occurs even in our main ORs. So here's what happens. This surgeon, and this is a schedule. This is not in real. This is a schedule that is a day prior to the day of surgery. This is the schedule, and this is the schedule for the same center, same 2 surgeons a week prior. So we'll talk about the differences. So here's what's happening. You can see surgeon 1 here has this overlap happening, a lot of overlap happening between cases, and surgeon 2, who's doing more of these longer cases, the overlap is a little less, but they are still overlapping. Now, a week prior, this is how their schedule is building up. Surgeon 1 has 5 cases already placed, again in this staggered overlap manner, and has 1 case waiting. It's in a virtual room. That means this will get placed. Now, where should this case go? Would it be ideal to do here, or can we create the staggered 2-room schedule where this case should fit. And even more so for this other surgeon. This other surgeon has 4 cases waiting, and it's possible that more might come. Although a week prior, elective cases usually don't come. So it might be that he or she will do 6 cases. But what's the best way to do them? Including the fact that there will have to be some overlap. So really, we are scheduling 2 rooms together. And you will notice, because of the scheduling pattern, there are large gaps in between, which leave a lot of capacity unused. And unfortunately, that's the reality. This will go unused. In addition, it's possible that these cases take longer than they have planned for. So for example, imagine if this case takes more than it was planned. It would not just impact this room, it's also going to impact the other cases in this room. So all of the schedule gets impacted because of the uncertainty here. And then all of the overlapping stuff, and including so many multiple interesting, I think, scheduling issues here. Scheduling 2 rooms together, scheduling the staggering behavior, as well as how much of the staggering is actually feasible, right? Ideally, it would be ideal if they were exactly parallel to each other, but obviously that's not possible because it's the same surgeon. So how is it that the surgeon is able to do these overlaps? So let's look at some data for that. Here's what is actually happening. So, sorry for this rude, rough. I just created this yesterday. We have what we call a prior case and then a subsequent case. And then the subsequent case becomes the prior case for this subsequent case, right? So prior, subsequent. And we have 3 timestamps which are critical to understand this overlapping behavior. This first timestamp in the prior case is what we call the last procedure closing. That means the patient is still obviously unconscious on the table, but the surgeon has primarily finished all the critical portions of the surgery. And if they have help, like a resident, a fellow surgeon, at this time, typically a surgeon can, depending upon how confident they feel in their help, they can typically move out of the room. Finally, at this stage, the incision is closed. That means now the body is stitched back up. Now anesthesia takes over, they wake up the patient, and then the patient finally leaves the OR. So somewhere from last procedure closing to out of the room, patient out of the room, the surgeon can basically leave the OR and move towards the next room. Now, ideally, if they are leaving here, they would want to be coming right about here. Now, what is this? This is wheels in, patient is inside the room. Anesthesia is ready. That means anesthesia have done their part. Now there is a little bit of a timeout. Everybody stops, they check, everything is ready, and then the surgeon makes the next incision. So ideally, from a surgeon perspective, they would like to leave here, last procedure closing, and enter the OR right at about this time, if it can be timed that way. So bigger this overlap, the more efficient a surgeon's own use. But from a room perspective, it may not be ideal, but at least it's ideal from a surgeon perspective. So here's some initial data around this. This is the prior case, so last procedure closing, and then this is the subsequent case, right? So here's the 3 timestamp for the prior case, 3 timestamps for the subsequent case. Look at the surgeon behavior here. This surgeon, the green is good. A -18 here implies that the in OR happened 18 minutes prior to last procedure closing for this surgeon on a median time for their cases. So what does that mean? In OR 18 minutes prior to last procedure closing. This in OR is happening, let's say this is last procedure closing, in OR is happening here. That means 18 minutes prior to the procedure in the prior case starting to close, the next patient has already been wheeled into the OR. So much higher, tighter overlap here, as opposed to, let's say, this surgeon, where the in OR is happening 16 minutes after last procedure closing. So that would be more like this in OR happening about here. So the schedule for this surgeon will be much more separated than the first surgeon, which will be much more tighter in that respect. So what then happens is they both may be doing the same amount of surgeries in the two ORs, but one surgeon will finish much earlier. You can see here, the difference here is already, you can see 18 and 16, 34-minute difference just in the first two cases. The second surgeon's use of the ORs will look much better, or it won't look better, but it will be much longer for the day than the first surgeons, because they are finishing cases faster in a more tighter manner. So with this, I wanted to bring out this interesting angle that in our scheduling side, we have not developed a lot of behavioral oriented scheduling in our modeling. And I feel there may be an opportunity looking at these kind of stuff that we may be able to bring some of those concepts here. And then I'll just show this last one, and maybe then I can stop. I think there is also an opportunity to extend this research, the earlier one that I was showing about emergency cases being scheduled into elective ORs. If we want to take a kind of an extreme view, I want to say. And what that means is we have ORs that must always be open. There must be an OR available all the time. And here's an example when that happens. When a cesarean section occurs, so labor and delivery, mom is giving a birth, a regular method, but suddenly there is a complication and the mom needs to be rushed quickly to an OR so that they can deliver the baby. In the most extreme case, the time limit is 18 minutes. From the normal delivery room into the OR needs to happen within 18 minutes. And that basically means one OR needs to be available all the time. So in the hospital I've seen, they have two cesarean section rooms and they only operate one at a time. If a cesarean section is going, they will keep the second one open, and then so on and so forth. Now, since the cesarean section volume is growing and cesarean sections can be that immediate, they can be waited up to 60 minutes, or they can even be scheduled. Because it's not an emergency, but it is decided this is a complicated pregnancy, this will not be a normal delivery, let's schedule a C-section 10 days from now. So there are three types of cesarean sections that can occur. So in this location, because the C-section volume is growing, they decided that they actually want to take one of the other gynecology surgery rooms. Now, these are women with not labor and delivery, but other gynecology issues. And so without looking at other innovative scheduling policies, the decision was made that one room was given away to C-section. And now what they are able to do is they keep one room open and they can schedule cases as they want in the other two rooms. Now, we know from our operations management that this is likely not the best scheduling scheme that they could have come up with. And especially knowing from the pooling literature, that what if all, because these are interchangeable, clearly these are interchangeable rooms, what if we could have pooled all the 5 ORs together, and can then we come up with these scheduling schemes where at least one will always be open for scheduling, and we can still do the same amount of surgeries that we are currently doing. For example, what has happened now is 1 OR worth of cases are not being done in these 5 rooms. They have to be relocated, causing a lot of inconvenience from a surgeon scheduling perspective. But could we have come up with a better scheme knowing fully well that we must have one OR available within 18 minutes and at least some ORs within 60 minutes. So I think another interesting area of research here potentially possible. I think if you're okay, then I can stop at this time. This was the other research that I wanted to go through, but this will probably take some time. This is our paper that got recently published in MSOM, ambulatory surgery capacity, and it also came out of a real world simulation work that we had to do at the hospital. And that led to an interesting research problem, which then I worked with my co-authors, and it's they modeled it as a hybrid flow shop, but we extend that because in hybrid flow shop there is a fixed capacity constraint. What we came up with here is what should be the ideal capacity of an ambulatory surgery center, not just for the ORs, but including the holding room and the PACU for different levels of patient types and different patient arrival patterns. How much capacity, how many bays should be in the holding room, how many bays should be in the PACU to support the ORs. And so it's a kind of a comprehensive capacity management, but inbuilt with scheduling policies to achieve to give us a tool to understand how these things interact with each other. Okay, I will stop at this time.
Okay. So thank you very much, Vikram, for your very informative talk. And now let me open discussion. Does anybody have a question or some opinion to say? You should be able to unmute yourself if you want to ask question.
Thank you, Vikram. Quite interesting as usual. Thank you for organizing these seminars as well, Professor Hanzalek. So my question to Vikram is, have you guys implemented some of these NIV papers results in your hospital?
So for the second one, which I did not present completely, it was the other way around actually. So we had already implemented this idea through the simulation, where we were able to understand that indeed the capacity we have is enough, and we don't have to build more PACU bays, because what was happening was we were thinking this with the change in the nature of services that we would end up doing in this new location, that we don't have enough capacity. So the simulation showed that no, we do have capacity, especially if we can interchangeably use the holding room and the PACU. So some patients in the morning can be prepared in the PACU because the PACU has space at that time. And then some patients who need recovery can recover in the holding room, especially in the late afternoon, because now the holding room has capacity because patients are. So simulation helped do that, but that led to this research, which was then more analytical, because we needed to generalize this. We only did it specifically in that simulation, only for that location, 11 ORs, 12 holding room, 12 PACU, right? So but this research then generalizes this problem to be applicable for any kind of an ambulatory surgery center. So not implemented, but it helped influence generalization through there. And for the other one, it was not implemented, but I think the insights were useful for people. Like it kind of reinforced to them that what they thought is the best way to schedule, which is to don't have all long cases at the same time, especially if there is variability among cases, don't have all of them at the same times be scheduled. So I think that that insight just reinforced, I think, the idea that that's the right way to do it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question? If not, let me ask as well. So may I ask you, Vikram, to go back to your slide number 20, where you have indicated on the first line that some surgery can be much shorter than expected. So it's about uncertainty of the processing time, so to say, right? Yes. So here you have pointed on the first line,
right,
on room 34, that it may happen that the case will be closed much sooner, right?
right, yes.
And to make it efficient, is it possible to consider something like backup operations that are on a whole waiting list that can step in quickly? Or is it too much linked with a patient preparation that I need to prepare patient just once, and it's not admissible to have him prepared and then not operated if the operation takes longer? Like to skip some tasks. So if an operation is short, then the task will be executed. The let's say backup operation will be done. If the original operation is longer, then the backup stuff will not be executed. Like something like less important operation, maybe.
Right. So I don't think, because the preparation will have to be, especially if the patient has gone under anesthesia.
Yeah.
Right. It can't be that we will so that we will not prepare it for the full extent of what's needed, right? So what will happen is, if it's a short surgery, now anesthesia has to find a way to get the patient out and up and from anesthesia, right? So that's going to take time. But I think what will happen, as you can see here, if the case does end at about 10 o'clock, let's say, instead of 4 o'clock, there is a very high probability that there are cases waiting on stage for a room. And so it is possible that the room does get used from those that are waiting.
But they are not prepared, right?
They are not prepared, right? So it will take time. Exactly. Yeah, it will. There would be some loss, some idle time between when this will, because, and also the communication, right? If the surgeon decides, okay, we have to finish this case right now, it's not like this case is, it's getting real-time communication. It will take some time for the circulator to then go and click on the intra-op screen that we are starting to close and we are expected to be out of the room, let's say at 10:30. Now, somebody in the command center who is monitoring these boards will say, oh, okay, this room's going to get available. Okay. Hey, surgeon, do you want to go next? But, oh, by the way, that surgeon is already operating in this room, so that surgeon can go. Who else can go? And so on and so forth. And is that an appropriate case for that room? Because if it's an orthopedic case, we would want it to go to an orthopedic room where the orthopedic nurses are. And so within all of those, that's the operational decision making on the day off that's happening real time basis, looking at all the constraints and then moving cases as appropriate.
So and right, in a very reactive way, right? So you react to the situation which happened, and you don't have any proactive idea, like I am considering several alternatives of the schedule beforehand offline, so that I can just switch between alternatives when it really happens, right?
Right, exactly right. We try to do that in that paper where we are creating an elective schedule so that the emergency can fit in. But again, it's a very stylized model of 3 ORs, right? But exactly what you're saying, that in proactively, could we have created schedules knowing that there is a chance that this case will get not done, and oh, by the way, there is another room which has similar, so can we schedule cases, right? So that proactiveness does not happening, especially because it's also segmented. Services are doing, each service is doing their own, each surgeon is trying to manage their own. And then at the global level, the OR management, the hospital is trying to manage all of it together at the day off.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Alexander Lazarev, do you want to ask question? You have unmuted your mic.
Sorry, but I laid my answer only in this moment. I am this lecture. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem, no problem. So and so then I can follow maybe with the last question, and that's room preparation time. So I have different kinds of operations. Some of them are quite kind of dirty, and it takes more time to make this space sterile, right?
Right.
And so there are like sequence dependent reconfiguration times or setup times of the room, right? In your figures, I have usually seen like separation times that have been kind of constant. So my question is, if it is also interesting to consider sequence dependent setup times, right?
Right. That's a very good point. Exactly. The very nice observation also. So why you saw the difference between the cases as being very constant, because that's our schedule, and we just assume a 30-minute gap between cases, but that's not the way it actually happens. Sometimes the cases could be 1 hour, like the turnover time could be an hour long. And so exactly, and it's we should already know that if the case does end as expected, the next will not start in 30 minutes. It will be at least another 15 minutes or 20 minutes. So right, that sequence dependent on the setup, I think it's a very good, that's how and that I don't think has been also tackled in an academic way also so far.
Okay, thank you. So the last call for questions. Anybody wants to ask? If not, so let me thank to Vikram. It was quite exhaustive. And let me announce the last talk of this academic year, and it will be given by Tami Tamir. She is from Israel, from Reichman University, and she will speak about scheduling with machine-dependent priority lists. So, and then there will be vacations, and we will restart in September. Okay. So the last talk of the season will be in 2 weeks at the usual time. So thank you for being with us, and hope to see you next time as well. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you for the invite. Thank you. Thanks, man.
Thank you.